Our first speaker is Lise Alschuler, who is a naturopathic oncologist. She's the author of 2 books, The Definitive Guide to Cancer and The Definitive Guide to Thriving After Cancer. She has 20 years of experience, and Lise, as I was thinking about this, I realized you've been doing your work the same amount of time that we've been doing Healing Journeys. We both started 20 years ago. Several people asked me last night what I'm doing about my own treatment, and so I have to give you a personal message, is that Lise Alschuler is my doctor, and I'm so pleased that she's here because she has so much information for you. Please welcome Dr. Lise Alschuler.
I'm first, I think, because Jan wants to sort of get me over with so that you can listen to more music and singing, which is really going to fill your soul. But perhaps I'm first because what I'm going to talk about is really our body, the home of our soul, and how we can create a body that cancer doesn't like to live in very much. And some of you may be thinking, you know, I have such a family history, such a personal history of cancer, there's no way that I'll be able to reduce my risk of cancer or to change my body in a way that cancer doesn't like. That's a fair thought. And really the way I think about this is if you know, you're one of those people, you might think that the writing's already on the wall and there's nothing that you can do. What I'm going to talk to you about is like taking a scrub brush and some detergent and scrubbing that writing off the wall so that it's pretty much gone. There's still going to be traces of the writing left on the wall. So we can't take our risk down to 0. We can't make our body a fortress against cancer. But what we can do is to make it harder for cancer to grow. And in doing that, we gain health. So this is about reducing our risk of disease. So I'd like to actually start with a definition of health. So this is a definition of health that was developed by the World Health Organization in 1948. They were pretty enlightened way back then. So they described health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Sounds all right. But it doesn't really sit quite well with me, so I'm going to make some changes. First, I'm going to take out the word complete. I mean, come on, let's be realistic. So, health is now a state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Better. But I'm still not pleased with that, so I'm going to make some more changes. Now let's try it. Health is a state of physical, mental, and social well-being in the presence or absence of disease or infirmity. That I like. Yeah? And that to me is really what true cancer prevention is. It's preventing the dis-ease of cancer. So you can be a healthy person and still have cancer in your body. That to me is preventing the dis-ease, the disease of cancer. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So therefore this talk is relevant to everybody in this room, whether you have a tumor in your body or not. All right, so now I want to talk to you a little bit about this process, and still some of you may be skeptical about whether we can reduce our risk. So let's take the metamorphosis of a caterpillar to a butterfly, and I'm going to narrate as you watch this video, and then from there we're going to sort of change our assessment perhaps of what we think is possible. So first, the caterpillar digests itself, releasing enzymes to dissolve all of its tissues. Certain highly organized groups of cells known as imaginal discs survive the digestive process. Each imaginal disc will give rise to a body part that the butterfly will need. There's an imaginal disc for eyes, for its wings, its legs, and so on. Some of the discs begin to create the butterfly parts even while still a caterpillar, while others wait for the cocoon stage where growth feeds off the protein created in the self-digestion process. This protein-rich soup fuels cell division needed to form the wings, antenna, legs, eyes, genitals, and all other features of an adult butterfly. Despite this complete transformation, there are some caterpillar parts that are preserved into the butterfly, some of the muscles and parts of the nervous system. Amazingly, it's been discovered that the butterfly remembers what they learned in the later stages of their life as a caterpillar. And it does all this so that it can fly. So this is truly an amazing process. If caterpillars can become butterflies, can't we change our bodies to lower our risk of cancer or the disease of cancer? Life is truly amazing, and its potential's limitless. Now, of course, this process is not easy. Admittedly, cancer throws some pretty serious roadblocks in your path. And the whole experience, in fact, can feel rather terrifying. It can feel as if your life is a whirlwind, or you have a whirlwind or a whirling dervish inside your body creating complete and total chaos. Well, I want you to know that science has understood this concept and finally come up with a name for this whirling dervish of cancer inside your body. It's called the Tasmanian devil. But in truth, the Tasmanian devil describes much of what cancer is. It feels like a whirlwind of chaos. It knows no boundaries. It has no control over itself. It's greedy. It's noisy. It's messy. It has unpredictability to it, and it requires our full attention in order to quiet down or to control it. So I want to just really recognize that part of cancer prevention, or preventing the disease of cancer, requires a rather aggressive energy, the energy of destruction, because we must focus some of our effort on destroying the aberrant Tasmanian devil within us. And again, science has shown us how this happens.
Hey, Tazzy, old devil, you sure toss a mean salad. But any real gourmet knows you just don't serve a tossed salad with rabbit. You serve it with wild turkey surprise.
Wild turkey surprise?
Too bad I'm all tied up, or I'd cook you up a batch.
Ooh, wild turkey surprise.
Want a wild turkey surprise coming up? Atsamada, hey, atsamada for you. You eat my raviola and my pasta fazola too. I'ma give you cacciatore and the pizza that's good to chew. Atsamada, you know like me, hey, atsamada for you. Eat it up while it's still a season.
So yes, we need to destroy the Tasmanian devil. Okay, so that's part of it, right? But that's not enough. We need to also make our home inhospitable to cancer. And we can do that through changing what we now have found to be 5 fundamental processes, fundamental bodily pathways that have the most significant impact on our health or on our dis-ease. And these 5 pathways, you probably have a little trouble reading this, but does my pointer show up? Are inflammation, immunity, hormonal balance, insulin resistance, digestion, and detoxification. Don't worry about writing that down. We're going to go through each of these in more detail. And to most impact those 5 key bodily pathways, there are 5 strategies that impact all 5 pathways in actually very dramatic ways. And I'm going to talk about these as well. We're going to talk about diet, we're going to talk about movement, dietary supplements, spirit, and rejuvenation. All right, so with no further ado, let's begin. But again, I just want to make sure that we understand that what I'm talking about is literally changing our destiny. Cancer is not written in our genetic code. We can actually change our destiny. A really good example of that are people who have BRCA mutations. Now, BRCA carriers are at very high lifetime risk of developing breast, ovarian, and other cancers. But what's interesting about this is that the prevalence of this mutation in our population has not changed from 1950 to 2014. And yet, the number of BRCA carriers in 2014 who developed breast and ovarian cancer is significantly greater than it was in 1950. So what's changed? The mutation hasn't changed. What's changed is the environment of our body and the environment around our bodies. And the impact that those environments have on how our genes express can dramatically change what happens in our body. And the reverse is true. BRCA carriers who maintain ideal body weight or close to it, who eat lots of vegetables and fruit, who exercise daily, significantly lower their risk of developing cancer, even though they still have the same mutation. So the genes are not our destiny, and that's an important thing to really keep in mind and to remember. And when I think about this, I think about a continuum of awareness. So, most of the population is living at the beginning of this continuum where they're unconsciously living an unhealthy lifestyle. They're just not even aware of what they're doing about their health. And from that, the first step is to gain an awareness of the unhealth of our lifestyle, and that's a very important first step. And then with that awareness, we can move to really working hard and being very conscious about how to live a healthy lifestyle. And if we do that well enough and long enough, we can actually move from there to living a healthy lifestyle almost unconsciously. It's just who we are. So there's a continuum of change, and it's okay no matter where you are on this continuum as long as you're headed or facing in the right direction. All right, so let me go through each of these pathways, and I want to just introduce them to you briefly. This is not, after all, a lesson in science, but the immune system is a very complicated system. It's composed of trillions of cells that search, identify, and destroy damaged cancer cells, virally infected cells. It's a very complex system. There are many different cell types, and they all interact and influence one another. So it's very much like an orchestra. So if you have an orchestra, in order for music to come out of this symphony or this orchestra, you need to have a conductor telling what musicians should be playing when. Each musician needs to be skilled at their music, and they need to work together so that they're playing off of one another. Now, a lot of times when people are diagnosed with cancer, they say, gosh, if I only had a stronger immune system, I wouldn't get cancer. That's a lot like saying, if this orchestra just played louder, we'd get good music. And it doesn't really work that way. The good music happens when each musician is doing their part, when they're crescendoing and decrescendoing, when they're on the right timing, when they have memorized their music. That's when we get good music. So very much the same way, having a good immune system to better destroy cancer cells is about creating better orchestration of our immune system. And that's a much more complicated proposition, but thankfully there are very good strategies and ways to do that. So that's pathway number one. Pathway number two is the pathway of inflammation. Now, to inflame means to ignite or to incite. It's a very active process, very appropriate to an acute injury. If we get a cut or a bruise, we bump into something, we want an acute inflammatory response. We want to ignite our defenses. So we call cells, immune cells, to the area. We create rapid cell division. We give cells the potential to invade into tissue space so that they can heal tissue. We call blood vessels to the area to get nutrients where we need them. Perfect response to an acute injury. What happens, though, if that acute response, that acute inflammatory response becomes chronic? And it's persistent over days, over years, over decades. This is the process called chronic inflammation, which is prevalent throughout adulthood, throughout the world, unfortunately, now. And with this ember of inflammation, all those same attributes are present. So cells are in an environment, when they're in an inflamed body, where cells are asked to divide faster, where they're given the ability to move around into the tissue a little bit more easily, where new blood vessels have an easier time growing. Those are actually the characteristics of cancer that I just described. So if you want to create a body that is perfect for cancer, inflame it in some level. And of course, if you don't want to do that, then you need to de-inflame your body. And again, we'll talk about some strategies to do that. Then there's the pathway of hormonal balance. So when I talk about hormonal balance, I'm primarily talking about the stress response. So now this is a very important response to our bodies and to our survival. It actually evolved with us as human beings. And we think it evolved in response to, as we were learning to stand upright and gain the ability to see, we might have been walking around one day and seen a tiger lying in the grass. And so immediately our stress response kicks into gear, the tiger starts running after us, and we run away from the tiger. Good idea. Now that stress response has gotten activated. And if we keep seeing tigers and we keep running, that stress response system stays activated, so much so that we get kind of jumpy. And then we're walking along in the grass and we might see a boulder, but our brain says, is that a tiger or a boulder? I don't know, I better run anyway. And we start running from boulders. Now, take us to modern life. The boulders in our life are traffic, deadlines, money, relationships, not having enough enough of this, enough of that, all these daily stressors start to activate our stress response. And our stress response gets stuck in an on position. And when it's stuck in an on position, we have a lot of stress hormones circulating in our body. And these stress hormones, in addition to helping us run from tigers, also cause cells to behave abnormally. And in fact, stress hormones have now been shown to produce the growth or to accelerate the growth of cancer. So stress response in the stress hormone system is a very important thing. We need to take that on switch and flip it off every once in a while so that we're not constantly under stress. Okay, pathway number 4 is insulin resistance. Now this is a rather complicated pathway, but I'm going to simplify it to say that when you eat a carbohydrate, say a muffin or a piece of fruit or anything, you convert a lot of that into sugar, glucose, which is not a bad thing. Your body needs glucose to survive. In order to get the glucose into your cells, your pancreas makes insulin. So insulin is like a chaperone to sugar, glucose. It puts its arm around glucose and says, all right, let's go. We got to get, you digested into some energy. So it kind of travels through the blood, gets to a cell, and on the cell there's specialized receptors called insulin receptors. You can think of these as doors. And only insulin can lock onto that receptor because insulin has the key to that door. So insulin puts the key in the lock, the door opens, now insulin goes into the cell, and along with it comes the sugar. Once insulin and sugar are inside the cell, the sugar is made into energy, and your cell survives. The insulin has effects too, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Now, if we live a life primarily of too much carbohydrate and not enough exercise, and our pancreas starts to secrete more and more insulin to handle all this sugar, our cells eventually say, enough, I don't need any more energy, and it changes the locks. And now the insulin can't get in. So you have high insulin and you have high sugar in the blood, not in the cells. Now, if you happen to have cancer cells in your body, cancer cells never change the locks. So all that extra insulin and sugar is going to preferentially go into your cancer cells. Cancers have voracious appetites. So they're going to take up greedily every piece of sugar they can get, and they're going to use it to make energy and to grow. Not only that, cancer cells, when the insulin comes in, they use the insulin to fuel its growth. Insulin actually triggers cell division. So now in an insulin-resistant state, which I'll remind you comes from a pretty long lifetime of eating more carbohydrates, not getting enough exercise, not getting enough sleep, that insulin, excess insulin, creates insulin resistance, which can feed cancer growth. So that's another important pathway. Okay, last pathway is digestion and detoxification. So when you eat, there's two things that need to happen. You need to take the food in, break it down, and then you need to filter or sort and filter. So you need to take the nutrients from the food so you can use those, and you need to take the bad stuff that's in the food, or sometimes that comes along with the food. Whenever we eat, we swallow more bacteria, those kind of things you don't want in your body. So you need to take those bad things and you need to kind of bundle them up so that your body can get rid of them. So that's like putting them into garbage bags. And those garbage bags will sit there until your body can take them away. Now, this process of putting cells into garbage bags is called phase 1 detoxification, and this primarily happens in your liver, which is the main organ of detoxification. So you start to accumulate these garbage bags, and then Thursday comes around and the garbage collectors roll up, and they take all those bags into their truck and they drive away. That's called phase 2, liver detoxification. And that truck rolls away through your kidneys and out through your digestive tract, and the bad things are gone. But what if the garbage collectors go on strike? Or what if you eat so much bad stuff that you have an overwhelming pile of garbage bags? Then you don't get it picked up, and you start to overflow with garbage, and it creates kind of a stench. And cells don't do well under stench. In fact, cells start to behave very abnormally when it's stinky. And they start to divide faster, and they start to gain aggressive behaviors, hence cancer can develop. So biotoxicity, or having a high toxic load, which is in part due to having an inefficient detoxification process, is also a risk factor for cancer. Okay, so that's the 5 pathways. Now we're going to move into strategies that we can use to optimize the function of those 5 pathways towards health and away from disease. So the first thing, just to remind us, is that we're talking about changing not our DNA, not our genes, but how our genes express and how our cells behave. And that is entirely within our control. So the 5 pathways I'm going to focus on are rejuvenation, movement, spirit, dietary supplements, and diet. And I want to start with exercise. Exercise, in my opinion, is probably the most important strategy of everything that I'm going to talk about, believe it or not. When you exercise, you feel better. You have more energy. People that exercise regularly are calmer. They're less likely to be irritable and upset. They have better stress response systems. They feel happier. And you get a lot of benefits from exercise, as represented on this slide. Your bones are stronger. Your risk of diabetes is lower. Your risk of dementia is lower. You have better immunity. You have reduced inflammation. You're less likely to gain weight. You have a better, stronger heart. And perhaps most importantly to this room, you lower the risk of many cancers, including colon, prostate, breast, uterine, which is the endometrial, and lymphoma. There was a big meta-analysis, which is a big, powerful study where they take a bunch of studies, combine them together to get really strong results. And from that study, they found that regular exercise reduced the risks of all these cancers that I just mentioned by about 50%. That's more than any drug on the market. And that's more than any other strategy I'm going to talk about. So exercise and movement is really important. Our bodies are meant to move. So, okay, good enough. How much exercise should we do? The magic number is 30 minutes, 5 times a week. That's where you begin to see the benefits of exercise. So how do you do that if you're sedentary right now and you're not a regular exercise? You don't even have to do those 30 minutes all together. You can actually string them together throughout the day. So for example, you could do a brisk walk for 10 minutes. And then maybe a little bit later in the day, you can do 10 minutes of stretching, active stretching. And then maybe later, you take another walk because you've parked your car further away from the store that you're going to, and by the time you've done all that, you've had your 30 minutes. Now, I just want to remind you that 30 minutes of exercise a day represents only 2% of your total 24 hours. So I'm really not asking a lot here. 2% of your day I would like you to devote to activity at your level. And if this is where you're starting, start here. Absolutely. This is beautiful. If you can do this 5 days a week, you will start lowering your risk of dis-ease and increasing your health. Now, if you've already got this far and you want to move further, we now know that more is better. So just to give you some statistics around this, and these are just from several studies, but vigorous exercise reduces your risk of breast cancer by 14%, as opposed to moderate level activity, which would reduce it by 3%. So you can see that the more intensely you exercise, the better your body benefits, the more your body benefits. In another study, 30 minutes of moderate intensity exercise 5 days a week reduced the risk of dying of breast cancer by 25%. Vigorous exercise lowers the risk of developing advanced prostate cancer by 67% and lowers the risk of dying of prostate cancer by 74%. These are really hard numbers to ignore. These numbers are so powerful that many oncologists, conventional oncologists, are now talking about exercise to their patients. Yeah, finally, right? So just as you're thinking about moving up the scale of intensity, look at the difference between these different levels. So light activity maybe is a slow walk or shopping or even doing housework like washing the dishes. There's some interesting studies that people who wash the dishes by hand instead of using the dishwasher actually burn more calories and gain exercise benefits, as an example. Modern activity would be taking that walk up a notch, so you're walking a little bit faster. You might get on your bicycle and ride on a level area. You might start doing some dancing, some golfing, some gardening. That's all moderate exercise. And to get into the vigorous category, now you need to do pretty much race walking or jogging or bicycling up and down some hills, maybe playing some tennis, doing some heavy yard work. So wherever you are in this category, my advice to you is to think about how you can move to the next category and start small. If you're doing light activity for 30 minutes, every 5 minutes put 1 minute of moderate level walking into your walk. So you're doing, at the end, 5 minutes in that 30 minutes of moderate level. And then build that. So the next week, maybe you do 2 minutes of moderate level walking, and so on. So just take your time, but try to build to more intense exercise, to your capacity. Okay. Strategy number 2, diet. So first of all, I want to just answer the question about can diet make a difference, because this is actually hotly debated in conventional oncology, which is why still most oncologists say eat whatever you want, doesn't matter. And in fact, it does matter, believe it or not. There was a very large study of over 112,000 adults. And this study found that those adults who maintained a healthy body weight, who ate many servings of, multiple servings of fruits and vegetables on a daily basis, who limited their alcohol intake and limited their soft drink intake, and exercised regularly, lowered their risk of death if they were men from cancer by 30%, lowered their risk by 24% if they were women. So diet does make a difference. Now, if you eat the perfect diet, does that guarantee that you're not going to get the dis-ease of cancer? No. But it does lower the risk. It scrubs some of that writing off the wall. So what's the basic diet? This is what I call the foundational diet. There are a lot of fancy diets out there, a lot of very strong adherence to one diet or another. Some of those diets really do make a difference for different people for different reasons. But the foundation, the thing they have all in common and things that should be done for the most part for everybody, this is the kind of the one-size-fits-all approach, is basically outlined on this slide. So there's do more. On the do more side, you want to have more organic and colorful fruits and vegetables, and I'll talk about that in a moment. You want to have more organic whole grains. I'll talk about that as well. You want to eat as many spices as you can. Your cupboard should be full of culinary spices, and you want to flavor your food with them because spices are powerfully packed with antioxidant, anti-cancer compounds. Spices are one of the best medicinal things you have in your kitchen, so use as many of them as possible. Nuts, seeds, and the oils from nuts and seeds are very important. Legumes, like beans, for example, and grass or pasture-fed meat and deep-sea fish are all fine and healthy, and organic green tea and filtered water. So that's kind of just very simplistically do more of all that, and at the same time you want to do less added sugar and salt. You want less preservatives, additives, and artificial colors and flavors, and I'll come back to that in a moment. You can have some alcohol, but you don't want to overdo alcohol. I can't really come up with a reason why you should have a soft drink, so just don't do soft drinks. No refined carbohydrates, or very little, which is, what's a refined carbohydrate? It's anything that's been milled and bleached, so white flour, white sugar. So we're talking about pastries, we're talking about white bread, we're talking about desserts, candy bars, etc. Occasionally, no big deal, but a pattern where you're eating that stuff every day or multiple times a day, that's where it starts to cause a problem. So do less of that. Less saturated and trans fats, that would be coming from commercially fed meats and dairy from commercially fed or industrially fed animals, as well as from processed pastries. And in general, fewer calories. So let's talk a little bit about this. So there's a very basic concept in nutrition that calories in should equal calories out. And if there's more calories coming in and fewer calories going out, then your weight will go up. So that kind of makes logical sense. It's actually a little bit more sophisticated in terms of the kind of calories. But in general, when we're talking about cancer prevention, caloric intake has a really strong bearing on our health and our disease risk. And for reasons that some of which I'll talk about in a little bit, when you take too many calories in, you stress your physiology in a way that causes you to create chronic inflammation and to disrupt immunity and to stress your stress response axis, and you can actually create an environment that's very favorable to cancer. So simply overeating is actually a cancer-producing event. So we need to really take a look at the calories we're consuming, and to make sure that if we're eating more than perhaps we should, we need to start doing exercise to burn off some of those extra calories. And we need to also think about reducing our caloric intake. Even in some studies, taking your total calorie intake and reducing it by as little as 5% a day. So if you're eating 2,000 calories a day, that's reducing it to 1,950. That's enough to start to improve the health of your body. So caloric intake needs to be looked at. And while you're doing that, you want to make sure you're eating a rainbow of colors. I always talk to people about putting a rainbow on their plate. So when they look down at their meal, they should not see tan, white, and bland. They should see colorful, vibrant food, and not artificially colored, of course. So when you eat, why is that important? Because the colorful fruits and vegetables in our world are made so by pigments in them called flavonoids or polyphenols. These polyphenols, and there are 4,000 plus of them in the foods that we eat. These polyphenols are only found in plants, and they are one of the most powerful anti-inflammatory compounds that we have ever discovered. So if you don't eat plant food, you are depriving yourselves of one of the most powerful medicines that we have to change the health of our body. And the more plants you eat and the more colors you eat, the more of those polyphenols you're going to get. So it's very, very important. And while you're doing that, you also want to get some good quality oils. Olive oil, and you all in California have no excuse. You should be having olive oil all the time. And it's a very important oil. It's very anti-inflammatory. It's very uniquely supportive to the immune system. And it's very helpful for our digestion. And in fact, olives themselves are very useful. Olives are a fermented food, and fermentation is a way to improve digestion. And so olives, olive oils are very important. And these are better than oils that come from a more industrialized process of refinement. So for example, palm oil or corn oil are not good for us. They actually incite inflammation. So put those away. Just put your garbage can open and dump all those oils in there and replace them with unfiltered, organic olive oils, coconut oils, avocado oils. Those are all really good oils to eat. And you want to generally cook with things like coconut oil and then use olive oil in salad dressings or add it to food, or you can cook with it under medium to low heat. If it starts to smoke when it's in the pan, it's too hot, and you should use a different oil. But as long as it's not smoking, you can also cook with it. Now, this is a picture of a whole grain. So what I want to point out is there are lots of parts to the whole grain that are important and that supply important nutrients that we utilize to promote health in our body. And when we take that grain and we mill it, so we kind of crush it all up, and then we bleach it, we remove almost the entire nutritional value of the grain. And all we're eating is essentially sugar. So white flour really doesn't serve any nutritional purpose. Occasionally, no big deal for a treat, but primarily what you need to think about is how can you get 1 to 2 servings of whole grains into your diet every day. So these would be things like brown rice, quinoa, buckwheat, millet, kamut. All these things are whole grains. They should look brown, actually, surprisingly. And you generally just have to cook them by boiling. They're very easy to prepare. You can put them in anything. I make my scrambled eggs. I often put brown rice in my scrambled eggs. I mean, there's lots of ways you can get whole grains. Okay. Now I want to just take a moment and talk to you about angry fat. And, one of the biggest problems that we have with our modern diet is this over-dependence on carbohydrates. So if you kind of just think back to your meals of the last week, think about how much of your plate, if you were to divide it into sections, were composed of carbohydrates versus protein versus fat. And then of the carbohydrates on your plate, if they weren't particularly colorful, they were probably more on the simple carbohydrate side. And as I mentioned, that all gets converted into sugar, which puts a big demand on your pancreas to make a lot of insulin. So the insulin that's secreted in response to those carbohydrates will be used to pull the sugar into your cells, but insulin is terrifically efficient at causing us to store fat. So when we eat a high carbohydrate diet, we actually will store more fat. So high carbohydrate diet builds fat. And fat cells don't like that. When fat cells start getting all of this fat in their cells, they start to swell. And it actually kind of pisses them off. And when they get pissed off, they send out these distress signals. And these distress signals, one of the things that happens is it calls a first responder in our body called the macrophage, which is a kind of immune cell, into the fat cells. So these macrophages come into the fat and respond with a, "I'm here," yelling back its own, I'm here to help you. And the fat cell's still swollen and distressed, so it's still sending out its distress signals, and you get this volley back and forth of these messages. Now, in the body, messages come in the form of chemicals. So what we're actually talking about are distress and macrophage chemicals that are volleying back and forth in the fat. These chemicals are inflammatory compounds, and they can't be contained in the fat for long. So pretty soon, these inflammatory distress molecules start to leak into the blood and start to get spread throughout our body. And now we have a body that's chronically inflamed. So the biggest cause of chronic inflammation, taking this all the way back, is eating a diet that's too high in carbohydrates, causing angry fat and bodily inflammation. Therefore, we can reverse all that by changing our diet. Okay. Now, You would think we would learn from the animals around us. Like if we ate like they ate, lean meat and berries and bark, we would be good. Well, what happens, do you think, if animals ate like we did? Okay, so moral of the story, I think, is fairly obvious there. All right, where's my pointer? So, in truth, we need to keep all this in perspective. There's a lot of shoulds that I just went through, and this is the perspective I want to remind us that being ashamed of liking food is like being ashamed of liking water or oxygen. It's actually okay to want the things that keep you alive. And in fact, a very important part of nutrition is nourishment. And when we eat, we need to be thinking about how to eat in a sensual way so that we taste our food, we feel the texture of our food, we're in the aroma of our food, we're eating our food in a relaxed environment with friends and family. We're not eating a packaged food that's tan and we're on our way running to an appointment. That's not the way we want to eat. We're meant to eat with great nourishment. So just an important point. Jan, I apologize. I'm going to go over a little bit, but not too much, I promise. I know she doesn't like that. Okay, so dietary supplements. I am going to try to go through this a little bit more quickly. So there's basically a three-legged stool of lifestyle. So there's one leg is diet, one leg is exercise, another leg is rejuvenation, which I'll talk about in a moment. It's only when those three legs are well in place that you can build a stool upon which sit your dietary supplements. They're called supplements for a reason. They supplement the diet. They're very targeted, but they can't take the place of these important lifestyle changes. And there's essentially 5 key groups of dietary supplements that, from reading thousands of studies, have the most significant impact on the health of those 5 pathways and on reducing the risk of cancer and the disease of cancer. So these 5 critical supplements are omega-3 fatty acids, which are found in foods, in fish, in algae, and in nuts and seeds. They're very effective at turning down chronic inflammation. So people that have inflammation in their body, when they start to take, for example, a fish oil supplement, they can start to quell down or quench those embers of inflammation. Probiotics, which come in foods from yogurt and fermented foods like the olives that I mentioned, are very important for immunity and also for detoxification. And we can take those as supplements in the form of probiotics, which are essentially capsules of live beneficial bacteria that help to support our immunity and our detoxification. Polyphenols, I mentioned, those are the pigmented compounds found in fruits and vegetables, and they're very potent anti-inflammatories. They also have a very important role in reducing insulin resistance, or said the other way, they increase insulin sensitivity. And we can extract some of those polyphenols from food and take them in supplements, things like curcumin from turmeric root, or EGCG, which stands for epigallocatechin gallate from green tea, or resveratrol from grapes, or quercetin from onions. We can take all of these as supplements, and they provide a very targeted and powerful way to make these anti-inflammatory changes. Antioxidants are found in all fresh foods. As soon as we start to process them, the antioxidants are destroyed, but they're found in fresh foods, and antioxidants are very important to support immunity, to increase our insulin sensitivity, and of course we can take them as supplements as well in things like glutathione or selenium. And then finally, vitamin D, called the sunshine vitamin, because it's made when we expose our arms, our neck, our face, some of our legs to sunlight between the hours of 10 and 2 for about 20 minutes every day. But if you don't do that, you're probably somewhat deficient, and fortunately, we can supplement with vitamin D, which has now been shown to be one of the most highly correlated vitamins with lowering both the risk of cancer as well as the risk of dying from cancer. So vitamin D is really critical. And if you don't know what your vitamin D level is, you should ask your doctor to have it checked so that you know whether you need to supplement or not. Let me just introduce you to the mitochondria really quickly. The mitochondria are little organelles within each cell, and they're basically the power plant within each cell, and they have a very important cancer prevention and overall health promoting role. So there's 3 things mitochondria do. They make energy. So when that glucose comes in, it goes to the mitochondria where it's actually made into energy called ATP. The other thing mitochondria do is that they respond to oxidative stress, and they actually unload a bunch of antioxidants to quench that oxidative stress before the stress can damage the cell. The third thing they do is if there's overwhelming oxidative stress and the cell is so damaged that it's going to, if it survives, continue to be damaged and eventually develop into a cancerous cell, the mitochondria come in and say, no way, we're not letting this happen. I'm here for the greater good. We're going down. And it initiates a process called apoptosis or cell suicide. And the cell deletes itself so that you, the organism, don't have to deal with the consequences. So the mitochondria is absolutely important to our cancer risk reduction and overall health. And we do a number on our mitochondria. Guess what damages our mitochondria? Overeating, not getting exercise, not getting enough sleep, and being deficient in certain nutrients. So to promote health of mitochondria, we can do some very specific things to help build healthy mitochondria. We can exercise every day. This is why I think exercise is the most powerful strategy. We can reduce our calories. We can eat a lot of cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, kale, cauliflower, cabbage. And we can take dietary supplements which are specifically supportive of mitochondria, CoQ10, glutathione, alpha-lipoic acid. A very important note, if you are currently under treatment, do not take antioxidants until you talk with your physician. And if you have active cancer in your body, find an integrative practitioner to help you decide if it's okay for you to do it or not. Okay. Last, 4th strategy, and I'm going to go through these a little bit more quickly because I think we're going to have a lot more on this for the remainder of the day, but really important is to think about rejuvenation. Rejuvenation is about living life with vitality in order to build vitality into our 5 pathways. And there's basically 5 R's of rejuvenation. So the first R is rhythm. This is 2 things. This is about living in accordance with the circadian rhythm of our bodies. So our bodies have little tiny organelles in every cell, which are called clock organelles. And these clock organelles actually correspond to the daylight and to the night, which means that different organs of our body are more active at night and more active in the day. And if we don't live in accordance with that circadian rhythm, so in other words, if we're sleeping during the day and we're staying up too late into the night, then we start to kind of alter or actually affect in a negative way the function of our body. So just kind of getting back into that basic circadian rhythm is one part. The other part is in reinserting ritual into our day. In all societies that have very long-lived individuals, past 100, one of the most common attributes of those societies across the globe is that they all live very ritualistic lives, so that they have the same kind of activities that occur day in and day out. Now, if you contrast that to the way most of us live, where every day is a new day, and we're constantly going from one thing to the next, our nervous system is totally on fire. It's like, what's coming next? I have no idea. And that sends a message to the stress response system that says, look, I don't know what's coming, so you better just stay on because we don't know when we're going to get to rest. And that, as I just mentioned earlier, is a risk for disease. So it's very important to reinsert ritual. Just give your body little things that it knows are coming every day so you get those down points and your nervous system and your stress response system can turn off, can relax. That's rhythm. The next is rest, and rest is very important. Rest is about getting enough sleep, surely, and also about taking naps, which are really okay if you're a napper. And when we rest, we reset a lot of the processes that we need to be working healthfully. In fact, cells can only do cell repair when we're asleep. Cell repair is one of the most important functions in cancer prevention and in taking a cancer cell and causing it to become normal again. So if we don't rest, we don't do cell repair. We have to sleep. It's also true that, for example, if you get one night of sleep deprivation of 4 hours or less, you will be insulin resistant the entire next day. So it's also very impactful to our insulin sensitivity. So rest is really important. Relaxation is about taking time out and doing some things that help our nervous systems to relax. Spending time in nature, reading books, reading poetry, prayer, spending time with friends, with your animals, whatever it takes for you to truly relax. And there's been some very interesting studies that people who are highly stressed, and they even have blood markers of inflammation, when they take time to relax, it doesn't take long. 10 days later, those blood markers of inflammation start to decrease. So it has a very direct effect on our physiology. Replenishment is about incorporating creativity into our lives and to give ourselves permission to be creative in our work, to do art, to listen to music, to dance, whatever it is that enlivens your spirit. And again, there's been research that shows that when people are engaged in creative activity, their brain goes into a mood state called joy. And when we're joyful, our body responds. And one of the things that's really most dramatic is there's these immune cells in our body called natural killer cells. And these are just like they sound. They kill bad cells, like cancer cells. When we're in a state of joy, there's 27 genes that get turned on in our natural killer cell, and the activity of our natural killer cells increase 50%, and they stay elevated for 4 hours after that joyful time. So it's a direct way to increase our immunity, among other things. And then finally, to remediate is about living life as we truly are meant to live it. You, individually, are meant to live it. It's about being in the right relationship, being in the right job, being in the right home, doing the right thing for you. If we don't do this, then we're in constant dissonance and distress. And guess what stays on? Our stress response system. So being in synchrony with who we are is important. Just a little word on sleep. This is just an excuse to put a dog on my PowerPoint, but just to re-emphasize the importance of sleep. Men who sleep for less than 9 hours per night, men need a lot of sleep, have a 48% increased risk of cancer. Women who can get by with less sleep, who sleep less than 6 hours a night, have a 62% increased risk of cancer. We really need to sleep. And I think this is something that we underestimate quite a lot. Okay, my last strategy, and then I'm going to close, maybe I will be on time, is spirit. So spirit is really, for me, asking and answering the question, for the sake of what? So we're all in this conference today. Why? Why are you here? And have you asked yourself that? You're probably here, I'm going to guess, because there's something about your life that you love and that you cherish and that you hold dear. And that is your true north. And that's where everything that you do and be and are should be oriented. And what's interesting is that when we orient ourselves in a spiritual sense to what really motivates us in a very deep way, our cells respond. And our physiology and these 5 pathways gain more health much more easily. What also is true is that when we're oriented towards what's true and what's important, guess what lives there? Motivation. Motivation to make some of these changes that I've just introduced to you today. So it's very important to remind yourselves of why you're here. And when you get kind of discouraged and lost, go back to that and refigure out what it is that really makes your life as valuable as it is to you. Actually, I'll just tell a very quick story. I had a patient recently. He had acute myelogenous leukemia, which is a very fatal, quickly fatal cancer. He was 88 when he came in to see me with his family, and he had a heck of a time of it. After his first round of chemo, His wife told me that he had developed fevers every night, he had nausea and was vomiting every day, he had to go to the hospital because his counts were too low, he was in there for 5 days, and on day 6, the day he got out, he came in to see me, and he was sitting there and he was just glowing, and I mean glowing in a good way, and he had this beautiful smile on his face, and I said, gosh, you know, you've just been through a lot, and he said, I feel great. I have no complaints. I'm alive. I'm here with my wife, my son, with you. I'm grateful to be sitting right here talking to you. I've made my peace. I'm ready to go when it's my time, and until then, I'm a happy man. Yes, spirit. Okay, so I want to finish with a quote from Mary Oliver, and I'm going to read you a poem of hers as well. So this quote, which we heard last night, which I was delighted to hear, is, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" So this poem by Mary Oliver: "You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes over prairies and deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things." That's Mary Oliver. And so, as Tigger says, it's not about how fast you run or how high you climb, but how well you bounce. So I think we should take insulin resistance and give it a low bounce, immunity, give it a high bounce, chronic inflammation, lock that down, hormonal balance, get that nice and balanced, and digestion and detoxification, we'll bounce that right up with the strategies of diet, movement, supplements, rejuvenation, and spirit. Thank you very much.